You're listening to Soundside. I'm Libby Denkman. At the start of every week, I sit down with another journalist to talk about the biggest news developing right now and how it affects the Pacific Northwest. It's called Front Page, and today's guest is all over the transit beat here in Seattle. They are a must-read to know how we are going to get around in the future in the Pacific Northwest. Ryan Packer, contributing editor at The Urbanist, is here. Welcome back to Soundside, Ryan. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks. Stoked to be here.
So what was your ride in today? What type of transit did you partake in?
I took light rail, took
Very
it
nice.
downtown for a coffee, and then back up here. So.
Oh, wow. You got a little fancy.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I always like to know what your route was. Let's get to our top story on Front Page. So that's the sound, a loud sound of a protest on Saturday in the Laurelhurst neighborhood in Seattle. It's east of UW, right on the water for people who don't know. The Laurelhurst Community Council has agreed to revisit the conditional use permit that the city had on the books for the helicopter landing pad at Seattle Children's Hospital. So this has been around since the 90s. There was an uproar online after somebody who claimed to be a medical helicopter pilot posted about the existing policy. And that is where only critically ill or injured children are allowed to actually be airlifted straight to Children's. The others have to land about a mile away and get an ambulance ride in. This is for noise concerns and safety concerns over the neighborhood. So we're not going to spend a ton of time on this, Ryan, because Anna Boyko-Wyrock is going to be here from the KUOW newsroom to kind of share all the details of how this unfolded, what happens now. But it sure is the number one story that I've heard talked about in my social circles, online. People are really exercised about what was revealed about this policy. What stands out to you the most about this story, Laurelhurst and Children's?
Yeah, I think it's a kind of a convergence of a lot of fascinating things. Number one being social media sort of virality, just exploding on Reddit. And I think, the X post that you just mentioned, it just really exploded outside of the traditional journalism channels. The Stranger had a story, a few days or weeks after all that kind of exploded. The Times I don't think actually covered this until the agreement was announced.
Yeah, that's right. It was like the news outlets, we were all following the social media coverage. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing that's kind of converging here is I think the power, or lack thereof, I should say, of community councils in Seattle. You're seeing evidence of a really powerful group in the 90s that was able to kind of convince a powerful hospital to come together with the city to limit its operations. And they had a lot of leverage in those days to do that, obviously. But today, it's a very different picture where I think those groups don't have as much leverage or clout. And so when they got intensely put in the crosshairs by this coverage on social media, people wanted to show up to their meetings. They wanted to, they forced them to take down their website because of people were finding their old meeting minutes and understanding more about what they had done. And their advocacy wasn't confined to this particular topic. They'd also tried to really shepherd the expansion of Children's Hospital a couple of years ago. And so, but now they don't have as much clout. And so I think you're seeing evidence of that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of kind of class issues happening here where people are looking and saying, wow, this is wealthy homeowners and this is sick kids. Like there couldn't be a more perfect thing for like the internet to cape for, right?
Yeah.
To say, how can you restrict how sick kids can land? I mean, again, we're going to hear more about this later in the hour, so we'll kind of put a pin in this for now. I would love, though, to hear from anybody living in Laurelhurst who could share their side of how this all went down over the last few weeks, because we've heard from the community council. We really haven't heard from an average Laurelhurst resident who, did you even know this policy was in place? Was there a debate, within Laurelhurst between neighbors about whether to defend it or not? I mean, I want to hear. We can keep you anonymous. Soundside at KUOW.org. Drop me a line. What is the inside story of how all of this has gone down from the Laurelhurst perspective? Because people are really being put under the microscope. And I wonder if, again, this negotiation that happened in the 90s, there's probably a lot of people who didn't even live in Laurelhurst back then. Yeah, I just want to know. I'm dying to know the inside scoop on that. But let's, again, put a pin in this. We're going to hear more from Anna Boyko-Wyrock later this hour. Moving on to our next story on Front Page.
There is no version of this plan that doesn't involve trade-offs, and I don't pretend otherwise. But I want to be clear, nothing in this proposal represents a decision to permanently defer or eliminate what voters approved.
That is Sounds Transit Chair Dave Summers at a meeting last week. Ryan Packer with The Urbanist here with me for Front Page. When you were here last, Ryan, we had a panel of folks from kind of different perspectives in the sound transit universe talking about the future of how light rail is going to grow in our region. And the issue is that there's a big budget deficit. The plans that voters approved in 2016 as part of the ST3 expansion were in doubt. There were going to have to be trade-offs, as you heard from Dave Summers there. And we talked about these different philosophies that were put forward, and they, were of various versions of dialing back these different lines. So Everett, Tacoma, West Seattle, Ballard, and Issaquah. Which of the trade-offs was Sound Transit's board going to go for? But I haven't talked to you since Dave Summers, the chair, actually put forward his version of what could work for the future. So what is going on at this point, Ryan? What is the plan that Dave Summers has put forward?
Yeah, so they kind of ended up adopting a hybrid of all the options that we talked about. As we talked about then, it was clearly not a menu. It was more of a...
Different philosophies.
Yeah. And so, the proposal that Summers put forward last week gets the budget deficit down to $11 to $13 billion from 34, which is obviously a pretty big change. It does that using a couple different levers. The financial plan is now extended out to 2052, so an additional 6 years. That means that the 4-line between South Kirkland and Issaquah wouldn't open until 2050, and so delaying projects, getting more money in the door is one way to reduce that deficit. There are also significant cost savings that have been unlocked already in the $11 to $13 billion range. But then there are also projects that are still on ice, up in the air, that are part of that $11 to $13 billion gap. So that's most of the Ballard line north of Seattle Center. That's Sounder extension down to DuPont. That's the Tacoma T-line extension out to Tacoma Community College.
So at this point, what are the next projects? If Summers' plan is adopted and the full board, I think, has to vote at the end of the month on this, what would the next projects that would definitely be happening in the coming years be? Like, what are the priorities for Sound Transit under that plan?
So the first one to move forward would be West Seattle, which is what they're calling shovel-ready, has federal approval, hopefully open close to around 2032. And then they're going to move on to Everett and Tacoma. So the so-called spine of the system, that would be getting to Tacoma by 2035 and parts of Everett by the end of the 2030s. Even
though those are really big extensions, those are priorities because, again, as you say, it's sort of like known as the spine along I-5.
It's known as the spine, and it's a part of the system that doesn't have light rail. Obviously, we have it in Seattle, but there's a lot of demand for it even further. But parts of the system where they don't yet have light rail have been clamoring for this.
Issaquah would happen. It's just delayed a lot.
Correct.
And then Ballard is really something I just saw Dan Strauss. He's going to have a meeting tonight at the National Nordic Museum about this. Folks in Ballard are pretty upset because this was something that voters approved and people living there have been expecting to be moving forward. But you're saying now that as it stands under the Summers plan, the line would actually stop where? In Seattle Center area?
Yeah, it's Seattle Center. Mm-hmm. And so getting to 15th and Market, including stops in Inner Bay and Smith Cove, wouldn't happen unless Sound Transit's able to find additional cost savings. And so, once again, that's part of that $11 to $13 billion gap.
And Councilmember Strauss is basically saying in his messaging that this was a promise that taxpayers received and obviously folks in Ballard are going to be trying to advocate for Ballard to be restored in the ST3 plan. I mean, are there options for Sound Transit to either find other major cost savings or go back to the taxpayers for this? Like, what are the options?
I think going back to the taxpayers is a last resort at this point. And so there are opportunities for cost savings. The Ballard Link is a huge project that has very complex details that when you have small refinements, you end up unlocking a lot of money. And so the plan is to advance Ballard Link to 100% design, which is pretty, obviously very advanced. And so to spend that money to make sure that we uncover every rock. And so the likelihood of being able to find, we know that the cost of Ballard Link is going to go down, if only because early in the project development phase right now, there's a high contingency, a safety sort of a safety valve of money to make sure that there's going to be enough to complete the entire project. That contingency goes down the further you get into design.
I see.
And then there's also, apart from voter approval for more money, there's other financial tools. The Sound Transit wants to go back to the legislature to unlock these longer-term bonds, 75-year bonds that would pay for things like the second tunnel under downtown, very long-lasting asset. And so there's a lot more financial levers that they're going to explore and try and push on the state. In addition to potential federal dollars, obviously the landscape right now is very scarce under a Trump administration.
It's a little different.
But we're talking about a project that's not going to be done until 2039. So
I know the legislature didn't get that bonding authority done in the last session. It's a longer session next time. That's something that Sound Transit's really going to be hoping for, it sounds like. So now what's next, Ryan, for this process? Because it seems like voting on this Summers plan by the end of the month, that only leaves a few weeks for people to advocate and respond. The folks in Ballard, the folks in Issaquah who don't like the delays. What's next?
I mean, it's being framed as not the end of the process. It's adopting a plan that is aligned with what we can do now. But board members are vowing for additional work, additional accountability to get to all of the ST3 projects. And so it makes total sense why you'd be very frustrated that the Sound Transit Board adopted a plan that doesn't give you a date for when you're going to get to be able to have a train to Ballard. It's totally reasonable to be frustrated by that. But, the next steps beyond that, where we're able to find these additional cost savings, what projects do get prioritized if money comes available? If you're able to unlock money with 75-year bonds, which projects are going to be at the top of the list? Obviously, people in Ballard would like to think that that's them, and they have a great case in terms of the ridership projected on this very urban, dense line. But those are still outstanding questions.
Yeah. I was driving to Everett yesterday to give somebody a ride, and I was just thinking, man, it would be nice if there was a train, if this was a train ride instead of a drive. How soon to Everett?
Yeah, we're going to get to part of Everett by 2037 and then Everett Station by 2041.
I'll keep an eye on that. I mean, it could be in a very different place in my life, but the region, I'm sure, still would appreciate. Moving on to the next story on Front Page. That is a mystery sound. And the reason it's a mystery sound is because Alexis Wiesand at the Seattle Times has finally reported out a real head scratcher of a story that I've seen on my social media feeds for a while. And I'm really glad that she did it because it's complicated. So I'm going to lay out the mystery of the missing WinCo store. Here we go. This is the haunted house that we are setting our stage at. The story starts at a big box store husk, basically, on 135th and Aurora in North Seattle. This is a block north of, like, the LA Fitness. It's a ways north of the Asian Family Market and Home Goods to kind of center people who know North Seattle. So this is the location where the old Sam's Club used to be, but that's been closed for 8 years. A big grocery store chain, WinCo, wants to open a store there. And that sounded like something that neighbors would get excited about. There's going to be groceries in that spot instead of nothing. But somebody doesn't agree. A group called Lake Washington Working Families appealed the city of Seattle's determination that the project would have no significant environmental impacts, and they argued that it would affect traffic and increase pollution. And last month, a hearing examiner agreed with the appeal and stopped the WinCo project in its tracks. So now WinCo is fighting the decision in court. And Ryan, I'm sure you have seen, I have definitely been watching these accusations flying online about who is actually behind Lake Washington Working Families. Are these actually working families that are neighboring the grocery store potential location? So Lexis Wiesand writes in the Times, quote, according to its appeal, Lake Washington Working Families is a group of King County residents who live, work, and traverse near a planned WinCo location and would be adversely affected by its opening. But the group has no digital footprint, no identifiable leadership, and no registration with the state. The group's attorney is based in Portland. And the heavy implication here, Ryan Packer, the urbanist, is that this is a potential union effort, grocery union or other union effort to stop WinCo from opening what would be a non-union store in Seattle. Lake Washington Working Families, according to the Times, lone public member was a shift manager at a nearby Safeway. They recently died. And that shift manager had testified in the hearing examiner case that he learned about the project through his union, UFCW 3000, was contacted by the Lake Washington Working Families attorney shortly after that. Now, UFCW 3000 has said, no, we do not fund this group. We are not involved. We would be open if we were fighting this grocery store location. Obviously, that's a lot of circumstantial stuff, right? There's no solid proof of the grocery union involvement. But the question is still out there. Who is opposing this grocery store? Ryan Packer, it is a whodunit mystery.
It's a big whodunit mystery. The same group actually tried to stop a WinCo in Renton, and the process there failed. And so that store is moving forward. So are they nearby residents in North Seattle, or are they nearby residents in Renton? So that's interesting. I think, it's clear that they are trying to conceal their identity. To me, the bigger question is kind of the process they're using to stymie this big box store from becoming something active as opposed to being vacant.
Tell us more about that.
And so, they're using the state's environmental laws, the State Environmental Policy Act, which is a tool that a lot of people over the years have used to kind of try and stop broader development, housing projects. And so, and the legislature has kind of tamped down on that, realizing that there's a lot of potential for abuse of the system. And so, but this is clearly still an issue because this was stopped, as you mentioned, by the hearing examiner, accusing the city or asserting that the city didn't evaluate the potential comparison between the current use, which is a vacant big box store, and an active one, compared to the Sam's Club that it was 10 years ago, with, basically saying that, you didn't consider the impact of all the traffic that's going to be generated, all the tire dust on stormwater. But to me, I'm like, well, but is that also compared to the people who would be going to a WinCo near them, driving to a store that's further away?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Is the impact of that measured quantifiably?
People who could walk or, take transit or bike to that WinCo rather than having to go further away.
Correct. Yeah. And so that's, to me, kind of the evidence of the narrowness of how we look at SEPA now, in terms of you just have to look at the direct impact, whereas looking at, especially when it comes to housing production, like we mentioned, people use SEPA to block housing, looking at the broader issue of what it means to add a year to process that slows down the construction of infill housing. On a macro scale, it's obviously significant.
Yeah, absolutely. I also just think it's interesting to see dark money working in this way, because we so often see dark money being, behind a PAC that's supporting a certain candidate or a ballot measure or whatever. But this is dark money working to oppose a grocery store.
Yeah.
It's unusual. It's a strange situation.
It's really strange. And it seems to kind of come out of the fact that, in a lot of legal proceedings, you're required to kind of show that you would be harmed by something, that you have standing to bring something like this. Doesn't seem like there's any requirement in SEPA to actually show that a grocery store opening would have a negative impact on you. Like that seems to usually be the kind of first stage of showing whether or not you can move forward. But
can you be a plaintiff here? But that doesn't have that same standard in this SEPA process.
And the fact that anybody in the entire city or county or state or anyone can just go ahead.
Well, this is a Portland-based attorney who's been the front for this.
Yeah, exactly. Can anybody just say that this would harm me and not have to actually kind of bear that out?
Yeah, it's a mystery, Ryan Packer, and that's why. Can we, before we wrap here, can we just hear the mystery sound one more time to get us in the mood? Who is the WinCo foe? That's the chapter of this mystery novel. Ryan Packer, we were going to talk World Cup, but we just ran out of time because I had so much fun chatting with you. We didn't get a chance to review Shakira's new World Cup anthem, the new jerseys that are Seattle-specific host city jerseys. So you're going to have to come back again.
Okay.
And we're going to chat about that next time. Ryan Packer with The Urbanist, contributing editor at The Urbanist. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to Soundside. Don't forget you can listen live on KUOW 94.9 Seattle at noon and 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, or anytime right here online at KUOW.org, or of course on your favorite podcast app.